Picture this. You are standing on the open deck of a cruise ship somewhere in the dark Caribbean night. The deck beneath your feet tilts and shudders. Rain drives sideways across the rail in warm, stinging sheets. The sea around you has turned a furious white gray, and the swells, mountains of black water, rise to 15 feet, lifting the ship's bow and then dropping it with a hollow, bone-deep boom. In the distance, lightning tears the sky apart in absolute silence before the thunder hammers in. You grip the railing. Somewhere behind you, a dinner plate slides off a table and shatters. You boarded this ship in Miami just days ago with a mojito in mind and salsa music on the schedule. Nobody told you that the Caribbean had other plans. That somewhere to your northwest, one of the most catastrophic Atlantic hurricanes in recorded history was being born, and that your ship was sailing directly toward its outer edge. This is the true story of what happened to Royal Caribbean's Empress of the Seas on the night of October 8, 2018. A night that most passengers will never forget, and that one man's phone camera turned into a viral moment seen by millions around the world. The Empress of the Seas had become a centerpiece of Royal Caribbean's Cuba program. Sailing year-round out of Port Miami, she ran a tight circuit of 4- and 5-night itineraries, the most popular short cruise Cuba routes in the industry. The October 2018 sailing was a 5-night voyage, departing Miami, tracking south-southwest past the Florida Keys and across the Straits, with a scheduled overnight stay in Havana and a return north through the Bahamas before arriving back in Miami. The passengers who boarded her that week were expecting the usual Cuban enchantment: rides in 1950s Chevrolets through Havana's colonial streets, cortaditos and café con leche at the ship's Café Royal, salsa nights in the Boleros Latin Lounge, and the warm, easy rhythm of the Caribbean autumn. October is considered shoulder season in the hurricane belt, a time when the worst storms have usually passed. The passengers had every reason to relax. But in the Gulf of Mexico, something else was taking shape. In the first days of October 2018, the National Hurricane Center was tracking a disturbance in the Western Caribbean. By October 7th, it had organized into a named tropical storm, Michael. It was tracking north-northwest, heading toward the Yucatan Channel, the narrow passage of water between Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula and the western tip of Cuba. That channel is the gateway between the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico, and Tropical Storm Michael was about to walk straight through it. On the evening of October 7th, as the Empress of the Seas was at sea south of Cuba, meteorologists watched Michael carefully. It was still a Category 1 hurricane, a serious storm, but not yet the catastrophe it would become. The ship's route to Havana took her across the very waters where Michael's outer bands were beginning to spread. The captain and crew knew what was coming. Modern maritime weather routing systems, satellite data, and Coast Guard advisories leave nothing hidden. The question was not whether the ship would feel the storm's edge, but how to manage the encounter safely. By evening on Monday, October 8th, the Empress of the Seas was sailing southwest of Isla de la Juventud, the large island that sits below Cuba's western heel, separated from the main island by the Gulf of Batabano. At this location, the outer spiral bands of Hurricane Michael were already reaching across the sea. Between 7:30 and 9 p.m. local time, the situation outside became dramatic. The swells grew steadily, winds climbed. The sky, already dark from nightfall, was lit at intervals by massive bolts of lightning along the horizon. Sustained, close-range explosions of light that turned the foam-covered ocean a ghostly white for seconds at a time. Among the 1,600-plus passengers on board was a man named Snapper Tams, an entrepreneur and social worker from Richmond, Virginia. Instead of the Cuban adventure he had paid for, he found himself on the rain-lashed deck with his phone out, filming. He later described what he saw to CNN. The sea was running 13 to 15-foot swells. The deck was heaving. Rain drove in horizontally. The lightning show in the distance was, in his own words, spectacular. Though spectacular was perhaps not the first word the seasick passengers below decks would have chosen. The ship was navigating Michael's outer bands, not the core, not the eye wall, but the spiraling outer edge of the storm's circulation. Even so, this was serious weather. A Category 1 hurricane generates sustained winds above 74 miles per hour, and its outer bands can still produce severe seas, strong gusts, and the kind of rolling motion that turns a luxury cruise into an endurance test. The Empress of the Seas did not simply charge through the storm. Under maritime safety protocols, the captain made the decision that became the real story. The ship stopped. It held its position southwest of Cuba for several hours during the early morning of Tuesday, October 9th, waiting for Hurricane Michael to complete its transit through the Yucatan Channel. This was the right call. The Yucatan Channel is relatively narrow, and a ship caught crossing it in the path of an intensifying hurricane would face conditions far worse than the outer band encounter of the night before. By holding south of the channel's entrance, the Empress allowed Michael to track north into the Gulf before resuming her course. The arrival in Havana was significantly delayed, but the Empress of the Seas eventually made it into port. While the Empress steered toward Havana, Hurricane Michael did not remain a Category 1 storm. In the warm, deep waters of the Gulf of Mexico, which it had now entered through the very Yucatan Channel the ship had waited to clear, Michael intensified at a terrifying pace. By October 9th, it had reached Category 3. By morning of October 10th, it was a Category 4 hurricane with sustained winds near 140 miles per hour. It made landfall near Mexico Beach in Panama City, Florida, on the afternoon of October 10th as nearly a Category 5 storm, the strongest hurricane ever recorded to hit the Florida Panhandle, and the third most intense Atlantic hurricane to make U.S. landfall in recorded history. Entire neighborhoods were erased. More than 40 people died across 4 states. The storm that had merely inconvenienced and nauseated the passengers of the Empress 2 nights earlier went on to destroy communities that would take years to rebuild. The contrast was not lost on Snapper Tams, who had filmed it building from a cruise ship deck just 48 hours before landfall. June 2001, engine room fire. The most serious event in the vessel's history, then named Nordic Empress, occurred 140 miles north of Bermuda. A loose bolt in a fuel line caused a catastrophic engine room fire and explosion. It took 3 hours to extinguish using halon suppression and sprinklers. The ship limped back to Bermuda under partial power. Losses exceeded $8.8 million. Actress Tina Fey, then a newlywed, was among the 1,566 passengers. She later described the experience in her autobiography, Bossy Pants. June 2016, engine failure. Shortly after departing Miami on a Western Caribbean itinerary, the ship suffered an engine failure, limiting her to 10 knots. Grand Cayman was skipped entirely. Royal Caribbean offered affected passengers a 10% onboard credit. October 29, 2018. Propulsion issues. Just 3 weeks after the hurricane encounter, propulsion problems forced the cancellation of a planned stop at Santiago de Cuba. December 21, 2018. At-sea rescue. Radar operators detected an anomaly in the Caribbean. It turned out to be a small fishing vessel. 2 fishermen aboard had been adrift for 20 days without food, fuel, or water. The ship's crew lowered a lifeboat and rescued both men. From a famous actress's honeymoon nightmare in a burning engine room, to a viral storm encounter broadcast live on Twitter, to a quiet act of heroism in the night, the Empress of the Seas lived a full and turbulent life. She was retired from Royal Caribbean in December 2020 and sold to Cordelia Cruises of India. But for those 1,600 passengers who rode out the outer bands of Hurricane Michael on October 8th to 9th, 2018, gripping rails, watching lightning split the Caribbean sky, waiting in the dark for a monster to pass, the Empress of the Seas will always be the ship that stood between them and catastrophe.